Welcome back, everybody. This is the latest in my series of videos of recent vinyl pickups, recent listens, Fat City Spinout, I call it, tweaking the format a little bit. Bringing us in sounds of Jamaican harmony group, the Ethiopians. Tune called What Make You a Galang So from 1970. Producer Duke Reed. Ease Up the Pressure. Included on the recent compilation, Songs of Our Forefathers, from the Studio 16 label out of the UK, brand new release, reissue. The Ethiopians were one of the top-ranking Jamaican harmony groups, starting out in the ska days. Basically formed around singer Leonard Dillon, was known as Jack Sparrow in his early days due to his singing abilities. Started singing in the church, picked up stonemasoning as a trade, and eventually moved to Trenchtown, Jamaica. There he ran across Peter Tosh, member of the Wailers, Bob Marley and the Wailers. Peter Tosh brought Leonard Dillon to Studio One, the famed Studio One label, to audition for producer Coxsone Dodd. Dillon passed the audition, cut a few 45s as under the name Jack Sparrow for Coxsone Dodd. They did okay, didn't really do a great deal of business. Finally, Dillon came back with a full three-person group in the three-man harmony style of the time. They were trying to settle on a name. It was between the Ethiopians and a couple other choices. Coxsone Dodd encouraged them to go for the name the Ethiopians, had that more spiritual, more cultural sound, which was coming into vogue in those days. During this time, Leonard Dillon also became a member of the Rastafari order, would become increasingly spiritual as the years went on, would remain a Rastafarian for the rest of his life. This compilation came out just this year out of the Studio 16 label in the UK. It's been quite prolific recently, putting out some Lee Perry productions, but also non-Lee Perry affiliated things like this, which collects some singles for various producers from the UK issues here. Producers like Sir JJ primarily, Duke Reed, Sonia Pottinger's Gay Feet label. The Ethiopians would go on to have many hits as a full group. Tunes like Train to Skaville, Engine 54, Everything Crash, which is included on this compilation, talking about strikes and economic chaos in Jamaica. Many of their big hits. Another one, Hong Kong Flu, It's a Killer. Some less well-known tunes here as well, but some big ones. No Baptism, produced by Derek Morgan. I actually have the blank 45 of that. No Baptism, showing the Ethiopians going in a more spiritual direction. Who knows it, knows it. Cool It Omigo, one of their big hits. They would have a number of albums released on Trojan Records in the UK, including Reggae Power and Woman Capture Man. It's a 2 for CD reissue, recent reissue on the Dr. Bird Records label. The original covers there, as released on Trojan Records. Put out by Dr. Bird Records very recently. In the mid-1970s, some various lineup changes saw the Ethiopians go down to a duo of Leonard Dillon and his close friend Stephen Taylor. But in 1975, Taylor was killed in a car accident. He was struck by a car in Kingston. Leonard Dillon was overcome by grief, withdrew from the music industry for a time, retrenched himself in his Rastafarian faith, and would come back with some deeply Rastafarian albums. There was a Slave Call, 490 The Observer, which appeared in the late 1970s. Also, Open the Gates of Zion, just credited to the Ethiopian singularly last Ethiopian standing, other members having left the group by that time. This is also a very recent reissue from Jamaican Art Records out of the Netherlands, kind of a successor label to the Dr. Buster Dynamite label. Same guy who put the Dr. Buster Dynamite records out, put this one out. Very expensive album to buy in the original format. And Leonard Dillon would go on to work as a solo artist, putting out the seminal Everything Crash LP back at Studio One in the early 1980s. Classic Everything Crash, updating that early hit, the late Leonard Dillon. Kind of an underrated singer from Jamaica. Carrying on with the Studio 16 connection, they've also put out this very rare album. The original came out in the mid-1970s, only 300 copies, no cover art. I don't think there was even a title, but it is widely known as Musical Bones. Credited here to the Upsetters with Vin Gordon. This is a Lee Perry production from the Black Ark years of the 1970s with his band, the Upsetters. So you've got Boris Gardner, Benbow and Mikey Boo on drums, Bobby Ellis on horns, Chinna Smith on lead guitar, and front and center is the trombone of Vin Gordon, aka Don Drummond Jr., he's sometimes called. This updates a couple of songs from his mentor, Don Drummond, founding member of the Scatolites. So instrumental reggae, it's kind of the closest thing to jazz you might hear from Lee Perry's Black Ark. It's very loose, very improvisatory feeling with that trombone front and center on all tracks. Reworks a couple of earlier ska era hits, including Real Rock. And one tune on here, Fly Away, was recorded as a dubplate version, taken to the UK, where Dennis Bovell picked up a copy, played it in a dance that night, and ended up being arrested by the police when violence broke out at the dance. He was charged with inciting violence up on the mic and his sound system. Did do some time, even though he was innocent of any charges. So very rare album on its original release. It's been reissued a couple of times, but Studio 16 in the UK has just put it out again with new cover art. Musical Bones, instrumental, jazzy roots reggae from the Black Ark. Another Lee Perry compilation that's just arrived, Play On Mr. Music, seemingly endless series of Lee Perry Black Ark productions, endless amount of compilations. This one is on the Rakashaka label out of Japan. Some rare and unreleased versions on here, includes a dub plate mix of Carlton Jackson's History, seminal Black Ark tune. If you want to know what the philosophy of Rastafari is all about, the sense of consciousness of roots reggae, it's there in that song. Also includes the highly sought after Play On Mr. Music by the Upsetter Review, which was kind of an impromptu jam recorded for a documentary at the time. Fans have been clamoring for it ever since. Rakashaka Records put it out as a 10-inch single. It's now included on this LP, along with many other tunes. Junior Mervyn on here, the Silvertones, more classic Black Ark goodness. Pulled this one out from the collection for a re-listen, changing gears quite a bit here. Donnie and Joe Emerson actually comes with a bit of a Obi strip style thing. Donnie and Joe Emerson, Still Dreamin' Wild, The Lost Recordings, 1979 to 1881. They were a pair of brothers from a rural farming town called Fruitland in eastern Washington. Nearest big city was Spokane, some 70 miles away. Grew up on the family farm, but they had a calling toward music. Started recording their own songs. Their father actually spent thousands of dollars building them a studio, state-of-the-art studio on the farm. Was kind of a financially questionable decision. They had to sell off part of the family farm to pay for all this studio equipment. There it is there, home studio, set up on the family farm. They recorded a debut album, Dreamin' Wild, privately pressed, which was sold locally. Their mom would go door to door selling copies of the LP and cassettes. Just straight up Late 1970s, going into the early 1980s, pop, kind of influences of Hall & Oates, bits of synth pop here and there, just catchy pop hooks, mainly fronted by brother Donnie as the kind of main force, main songwriter, lead singer, with Joe on drums. Of course, they recorded this one LP. This collects some tunes that were recorded shortly after that, that LP. Donnie would kind of continue to work in music, where Joe would focus on work on the farm and eventually going into construction. Donnie has continued in music with some success, but great lost early 80s pop. You could almost travel back in time and hear some of these songs piped in over the sound system of the local Kmart if you were in one of these small towns. Recent pickup, recent brand new release, 2020, Nubia Garcia, UK jazz tenor saxophonist, finally put out her debut LP. She's been building up an impressive resume the last few years with appearances on Makaya McCraven's Universal Beings album, with guest spots in groups like Meisha, Norija, and on various other appearances on various other albums. Finally, she's put out a couple of EPs. I do not have those. Finally put out her own debut LP. I have it on this colored vinyl pressing, which is a independent record shop edition. Jazz, basically jazz, but like many of these UK artists of her generation, she's bringing in a lot of different influences, reflecting her cultural background, which is Caribbean. So the title track itself is a LP side-long roots reggae dub infused production with her sax floating over top and lots of other influences. There's Cumbia, La Cumbia Me Esta, which is bringing in Latin rhythms. I think she recorded that in Colombia. Many other lovely tracks on here. Very calm, reflective, and bringing in all these different cultural influences of different genres. Just one of the stellar stars of the new jazz movement, who is making their mark on the music today. Lovely, lovely album called Source by Nubia Garcia, brand new. Also been listening to some Blackfire, the Blackfire jazz label, which was kind of a private black-owned label in Washington, D.C. I got a couple of CDs from the Strut label. They put out Blackfire Compilation, went for the CD versions of this. These are fairly recent arrivals. Covers some of the output of the Blackfire label, which was heavily involved with a group called Oneness of Juju, led by James Plunky Branch, who was from Richmond, Virginia. And I also picked up the compilation of Oneness of Juju from the Strut label. Plunky and Oneness, recorded under various names. He was born Richmond, Virginia. As he tells it, they didn't own a car, they didn't have indoor plumbing, but they always had a piano in the house. So he was exposed to music from a very young age. He went to Columbia University in New York to study chemistry for a couple of years, was planning to focus on science, eventually dropped out to focus on music full-time. He was drafted into the U.S. Army. This is, of course, at the time of Vietnam, the civil rights movement, everything going on. He stuck around, as he said, just long enough to learn how to use a gun, figuring that would be a useful skill to have if the revolution came, as he became increasingly politicized of the Black Power movement of the time. Then he deserted. He was wanted by the FBI, so he made his way to the West Coast, San Francisco, got into some of the musical and activist communities there, changed his name, kept the nickname Plunky, which he'd had since childhood, and got an African name, Kabinde. I think that's how it's pronounced. Eventually formed a group called Juju out in San Francisco. They traveled back to New York to record the Message from Mozambique album in the early 1970s for the Strata East label. This is a reissue I picked up several years ago in Seattle. Got the impulse to bring it back out again as I was listening to that compilation. Very free recordings here. This was not recorded to be a comfortable listening experience. It has kind of a live, improvisatory feeling, very out there, very avant-garde. This was designed to upset, to shock. Side 2 is very percussion heavy with some kind of chanted vocals. Tracks like Freedom Fighter, Make Your Own Revolution Now. You can see where these guys are coming from. The title was referring to a war going on in Mozambique, while the US was focused on the war in Vietnam, and blacks were fighting for their rights in America. They recorded one more album as Juju, still in that avant-garde jazz style, moved to New York permanently to get involved in the avant-garde community there. They were heavily associated with Ornette Coleman and moving around Sun Ra and his group before economics forced them to relocate back to Richmond, Virginia. There wasn't really the infrastructure or the support there for that kind of avant-garde jazz. A couple of members moved away, so they reformed as Oneness of Juju, still revolving around Plunky, and started to pursue more of a more commercially viable sound, bringing in elements of funk, R&B, bringing in some female vocals, and they would continue in that vein throughout the 70s into the 1980s as Oneness of Juju, various other names. So that is another thing I've been listening to recently from this nice compilation from the Strut label. I went for the CD edition on this already. I think the vinyl edition is like 3 LPs or something. Still more tracks on the CD edition and half the price. I'm going to leave you with Oneness of Juju with one of their bigger commercial hits called Every Which Way But Loose. Oneness of Juju. John, 6-inch pianist. If you're not all over these guys, check them out. Space funk. Peace, vinyl community.